family lawyers, etc. And he took the middle one and just took off with her in my car. Well, this is my other car, but the other car's registered in my name.
Okay.
And now he's telling me he won't give her back.
Where would he be going? Just home?
Probably home, I'm guessing. Right. And now he's trying to play games with me on the phone. No, we've been separated for a few weeks now. I'm staying at my parents'.
So what's led up to this? Just that you've seen each other and he's decided...
Yeah, and he's decided that because I've said to him, you need to wait until we can get this sorted.
Yeah.
You're not having them stay with you because you won't return them. And then I'm like, you go and pull a fucking stunt like this. The other two are absolutely beside themselves. She's pulling her eyes out.
Was anything, like, any other words exchanged? Like, how was he acting? Or he's just said
just a psycho that he's taking her, and that's it. And then he just called me now and said, you know, you either bring the other two back or I keep her. And I'm like, they were in my care. Like, they were in my care. I was doing a good thing.
Yeah, Constable Kent's probably said it's a bit of a tough situation. Without any orders in place, there's not a great deal we can do in relation to the custody of the children. So, being the biological father, he does have a right to the child, and unfortunately, we can't just go and take the child, even though he's acting like...
Even though he's taken her away from me when they were in my care.
Yeah, unfortunately, because he is the biological...
On February 19th, 2020, frantic emergency calls came in from the usually peaceful Raven Street in the Camp Hill neighbourhood of Queensland, Australia. A car was on fire with several occupants inside. 2 more victims lay on the pavement, fighting for their lives. When paramedics and police arrived, they were greeted by a scene of pure carnage, one that witnesses would be unable to forget. Despite their best efforts, no one walked away alive that day, and as an investigation began into what had occurred, a twisted tale of control, abuse and violence unravelled before them, leaving one glaring question: could this tragedy have been prevented? Sue and Lloyd Clarke welcomed their first child on September 8, 1988. Their daughter, whom they named Hannah, was every bit as perfect as they hoped she would be. Growing up, Hannah was bright and exuberant. She was the type of child that didn't shy away from attention. When her parents had their second child, Nathaniel, Hannah was 2 years old. She adapted to her role as big sister right away, often behaving more like Nat's mother than his sister. As they grew older, Hannah always looked out for her little brother. As he explained it, they were always in each other's corner. In high school, Hannah excelled both in athletics and leadership roles. After she left school, Hannah fell in love with CrossFit. It was this passion that put Hannah on the path that would lead her to Rowan Baxter. In 2008, 20-year-old Hannah met 31-year-old former rugby league player Rowan Baxter. He had recently moved to Queensland from New Zealand, along with his then wife and son. At the time, Hannah was still living at home while teaching workout classes at the Queensland PCYC. When Rowan started a boxing class that Hannah also joined, they started to get friendly. Hannah mentioned Rowan to her parents, and after hearing about the age gap, Sue was wary of him. She especially didn't like the fact that he was still living with the mother of his child. Even though Hannah assured her mum this was strictly for his son's sake, Sue didn't know if she could believe it. When the time came for Rowan to meet Hannah's parents, he presented himself well and managed to win them over. He was an expert at putting on a show and getting people to fall for the false image he created of himself. But Hannah had not seen that side of Rowan yet. The pair got engaged in 2011 and married in October the following year. They went on to have 3 children together: Aaliyah, born on April 10, 2013, Liana, born on March 19, 2015, and finally Trey, born on December 4, 2016. While the Baxters may have physically looked like the perfect family, with 2 fit, attractive parents and 3 beautiful children, the reality was far different. The first notable incident that showed Rowan's true character came after Nat allowed him to borrow his car while he was away for work. After repeatedly not listening to Nat's requests about the car and managing to rack up 30,000 kilometres, which is over 18,000 miles, in 2 months, Nat put his foot down and told Rowan he wouldn't be able to use the car anymore. This decision didn't go without a reaction from Rowan. He wasn't interested in seeing Nat's point of view, and only focused on the fact that something he felt was owed to him, in this case, Nat's car, had been taken away. From that point on, Nat felt a real contempt coming from Rowan, and it marked the start of a rift between brother and sister. Over the years, this temper of Rowan was something Hannah's family caught glimpses of more and more often, starting while Hannah was pregnant with their second child. One example of this behaviour was when Rowan would burst into laughter and then slam his hand down on Hannah's thigh. Sue didn't like this at all, but Hannah would shoot her a look accompanied by a small smile that told her not to raise it further. Things like that began to stick out to Lloyd and Sue. They saw their daughter, a once confident and self-assured young woman, slowly going into her shell. When they raised this with her, Hannah brushed their concerns off and justified Rowan's actions by telling them he had a rough childhood. When Lloyd and Sue then asked Hannah what exactly had happened to Rowan during his childhood, Hannah wouldn't explain any further. What Hannah's parents didn't know, however, was the true extent of Rowan's manipulation and abuse. He wanted to make Hannah feel small and unattractive. He wanted her to doubt herself. This all meant he would have more control, which was his ultimate goal. Hannah kept most of the details to herself, and as the years piled on, the effect Rowan's treatment had on her compounded until she was barely recognisable to those who knew her best. It's a case where everything seems more obvious in hindsight, especially when knowing that what Rowan was doing was classic coercive control. Coercive control is defined as ongoing and repeating patterns of behaviour used to control or dominate another person. While on their own, these behaviours could seem insignificant, their repeated nature is what makes coercive control so dangerous. When Hannah did speak to her mum about Rowan, she told her that he made her feel crazy. So much so that Hannah told Sue she sometimes wished Rowan would just hit her. That way, there would be something tangible. She knew that would be considered abuse, but she didn't know that she was already being abused through coercive control. When Hannah eventually left, it was something she had been planning for months, resolving herself to what was to come. Towards the end of 2019, she started opening up to friends about what was going on in her relationship and expressing her desire to start a new chapter in her life without Rowan. It turned out this was something Hannah had thought about doing after giving birth to her second daughter, Leanna. But when she fell pregnant with Trey, she grew increasingly concerned about getting away from him, as she believed he wouldn't let his son go. Hannah tried to leave on multiple occasions, telling her mum that she and the kids would be over on those specific weekends. Each time, Rowan had something planned that put Hannah off from following through. This wasn't by chance. It turned out he had tapped her phones and was listening into her conversations. Rowan knew when Hannah wanted to leave and used this information to keep her around longer. Hannah's breaking point came on the weekend of a CrossFit competition she was competing in with 3 friends. Hannah qualified alongside these friends to compete as a team, whereas Rowan was unable to qualify individually. He then pushed himself into the group, despite Hannah and the others not wanting him to be involved. However, a disagreement the day before led to Rowan pulling out, hoping that this would prevent Hannah and the others from being able to participate themselves. This wasn't the case, and they quickly filled that spot with someone else. This infuriated Rowan, a man that control meant everything to. Then, on the morning of the competition, Hannah returned home from the gym to discover her children and Rowan were gone. Panic set in immediately. Repeated phone calls to Rowan went unanswered. She was desperately worried that Rowan had taken off with the children, or worse yet, had harmed them in some way. Around lunchtime that day, Rowan called Hannah and told her the situation was entirely her fault, and he would bring the children back as and when he pleased. During this phone call, Rowan mentioned the fact that Hannah had called her mother and brother. Since neither Sue nor Nat had been in touch with Rowan, this was the first real proof that he had been listening to her conversations, something Hannah had long suspected. After such a traumatic day, Hannah was close to not attending the event that afternoon, but Sue advised her to go ahead and compete. She did just that, and sure enough, Rowan turned up with the children in tow. He pretended nothing had happened, even boasting about Hannah on social media once the event was over. When she got home that evening, Hannah was determined to leave. Only now she was more afraid than before. Rowan had made it clear he would use the children against her without hesitation. She also knew he had been listening to her conversations, so for the next few weeks, Hannah quietly built up the courage to leave. On December 5th, 2019, Hannah went to the gym and bumped into one of her closest friends, Nikki. Hannah could no longer hold it in any longer, and she broke down in front of her. Nikki had never seen Hannah like that and told her they were skipping the class that morning, and she was getting out of there. Hannah picked Aliyah up from school and briefly stopped at home with Nikki. She told the children to grab 2 toys each and shoved some of her things in 2 garbage bags before heading to Nikki's house for the night, since Rowan didn't know where Nikki lived. To avoid Rowan tracking her, Hannah left her car parked at a local McDonald's. Over the next few weeks, Hannah opened up more about what life had been like with Rowan. Even though she was living away from him, her life was still incredibly stressful. Hannah was on edge, and while her brother Nat doesn't feel she thought he would harm the children, he does think Hannah feared what Rowan might do to her. After so many years living under his control, Hannah found it difficult to not get sucked back in by Rowan's manipulation. Hannah's family did everything they could to support her through that time, reinforcing that how Rowan treated her was not right and that she deserved to start a new chapter. As 2019 ended, Hannah was slowly getting her spark back. She told her family that 2020 was going to be her best year yet, which makes the events of February 19th even more horrific. Hannah had no idea the horrors that were around the corner. It won't come as a surprise that Hannah taking the children and leaving left Rowan incensed. For years, he had crafted a relationship based entirely off his complete control over Hannah and everything she did. To him, her leaving was the worst-case scenario, and Hannah was not naive to the danger of her situation. She first visited the police on December 6th, the day after she first left. Sue had encouraged her to look into taking out a domestic violence order, but at that stage, Hannah was still unsure that what she had been through constituted domestic violence. Hannah spoke with a female officer, Constable Kent, and began trying to express Rowan's behaviours. I can remember her telling me something that didn't greatly concern me. Then she disclosed to me that he made her have sex every night, and I thought, okay, now we have got something, Constable Kent explained. The more Hannah spoke to Constable Kent, the more she was able to open up to her about Rowan's actions. On December 28th, Hannah started the process of applying for a domestic violence order. This came 2 days after Rowan had taken Leanna to New South Wales and was refusing to bring her back. The police were unable to serve Rowan with a police protection on that day since he was still in New South Wales with Leanna. Once Hannah had her youngest daughter back, Hannah was granted a restraining order that prevented Rowan from coming within 100 metres of where Hannah was living with the children. Just over 2 weeks before the incident, Hannah messaged Constable Kent and told her, among other things, that she needed to get a will together so that if something happened to her, her children wouldn't end up with Rowan's family. I don't want his family raising my kids when I'm dead, the message read. 16 hours before Rowan Baxter launched a calculated attack on his family, he called a domestic violence hotline. But it wasn't for what you may think. Rowan wasn't interested in getting help. He was asking after behavioural change programmes, not for what they would do for him, but rather what they would offer as evidence in court.
Not my idea, but apparently I have to do it. I'm not the one that has the problem, but I guess I'm just doing what I'm told.
Okay, you have to do something about it.
Well, I just think it's going to put me in a better position.
Even prior to the call, Rowan had already decided on what was going to unfold that day. We know this because of CCTV footage that shows him looking at mower fuel before settling on purchasing a jerry can on February 17th. Why he still decided to call the domestic violence hotline, we will never know. Wednesday, February 19th, 2020, started like any normal summer day for the Clarkes. Hannah was still living with her parents, and Sue got about her usual routine, with the children flooding into the kitchen to ask for some fruit while she was preparing her own breakfast. Afterward, 3-year-old Trey settled onto the couch and started watching TV. while the two girls, 6-year-old Aaliyah and 4-year-old Lyanna, went off to their room to play. At that same time, Rowan Baxter left his house with his jerry can in tow. He stopped at a service station to fill up his car, having filled the can with 4.6 litres of fuel the previous day. Lloyd had already left for work, and after helping Hannah with their morning routine, Sue left herself. She kissed her daughter and grandkids goodbye, telling them she loved them as she had done each morning for the past few months. As Sue closed that front door behind her, she had no idea that she was also saying goodbye to life as she knew it. That morning, while Sue was working at a dentist's office, she and her co-workers had commented on the amount of sirens going past. They knew something must be wrong somewhere, but not for a second did Sue think it involved her family. That was until someone looked on Facebook and saw the initial reports coming in. Minutes later, 2 police officers arrived. They were looking for Sue. At 8:17 a.m, Rowan Baxter pulled up alongside the Clarke home. He knew Hannah's routine. He had been watching her. Then, as she exited the front door with her kids and got into her car, Rowan swiftly ran across the street and jumped into the passenger seat with the jerry can in hand. He told her to drive, and as she spotted the can, Hannah would have known what Rowan was planning. She was now in a real-life nightmare. She turned out of her parents' street into Raven Street, where Hannah spotted a man washing his car. She saw this as her only chance to draw Rowan away from the children, hoping he would follow her. The man washing his car looked up to see Hannah desperately trying to get out of the car alongside his driveway. She was screaming for help while Rowan had her in his grasp. Rowan had drenched Hannah and the children in petrol, and as she yelled out, "Call the police! He's going to kill me! He's poured petrol on me!" But sadly, the car then went up in flames. Hannah then stumbled out of the car, her entire body on fire. The man who had been washing his car screamed at her to get on the ground, which she did, and he managed to put the flames out with his hose. Rowan had also gotten out of the car, and the man started to hose him down. He recalls seeing a look of pure evil in Rowan's eyes, which prompted him to turn his focus back on Hannah and continue to keep the water on her. Hannah, lying in agony on the pavement, tried to ask about her kids. The car then began rolling backward, and to the witness's horror, Rowan dove into the front seat. He then jumped out, and while on fire again, with burns to 80% of his body, he used the knife he had just retrieved to stab himself 3 times, taking his own life. This all happened in the minutes before a slew of emergency service vehicles and personnel arrived on the scene. When paramedics gathered around Hannah, she summoned all the strength she had left to tell them what had unfolded that morning and who was responsible. The paramedics knew her chances of survival were practically non-existent. Hannah had suffered burns to almost 100% of her body. The only part spared from the tortuous flames were the soles of her feet. She was anaesthetised and rushed to hospital, while the paramedics still on the scene did what they could to save Rowan's life. Despite their efforts, he was declared dead on the scene as one of the stab wounds had hit his heart, sending him into cardiac arrest. Later that evening, with her family by her side, Hannah Clarke died in Royal Brisbane Hospital. The damage done to her body was simply too severe. Within days, the whole of Australia knew about Hannah's case. To say it shocked the nation would be an understatement. Not only were the deaths horrific, but it was another example of an abusive relationship that had ended in murder, and in this case, the murder of 4 innocent victims. Since Rowan Baxter had killed himself, no charges could be filed, but an inquest was held into the incident. Much of what we know now of Hannah and Rowan's relationship was revealed during those 9 days of hearings in 2022. Lloyd and Sue knew most of the information that was discussed during the inquest, but they hadn't yet been told about the note found on Rowan's phone. It was written on January 26th and began, "Hannah, I have so much to say to you, but now that you're reading this, it's coming too late. You have turned my life upside down so fast that it has destroyed me." Throughout the note, Rowan paints himself as the victim. "You destroyed my life and I cannot move on. I hope all this was worth it for you and your family," one part reads. The undertone of the note is threatening, and some believe it reads like a suicide note. To Hannah's family, it acted as a prime example of the type of manipulative, controlling man Rowan was. The main goal of the inquest was to see whether something could have been done to stop the events that occurred on February 19th. When it was Hannah's close friend, Nikki's turn to give her own testimony, it left many feeling that Hannah and the children could have been saved had the authorities taken the threat Rowan posed seriously. On February 13th, Nikki spoke with police officers about her concerns about what Rowan was capable of. "I'm sure he's going to take them out," she told them. Nikki hoped that the people who were supposed to protect civilians would be able to die something that would help Hannah, something more than a piece of paper with a restraining order on it. The response Nikki got was infuriating. She was told that until Rowan did something, they couldn't do anything. "What if you don't get a second chance?" Nikki responded. 6 days later, exactly what Nikki had feared came true. When the inquest concluded, the coroner found that family violence services had acted appropriately, but there was a failure to recognise the risk of intimate partner homicide, which results from separation in a coercive, controlling relationship. The reality was the law didn't factor in coercive control, and as a direct result of Hannah and her children's deaths, coercive control was criminalised in New South Wales in November 2022, with legislation going into effect in Queensland at the end of 2023. In an effort to prevent future tragedies like the one that ripped their family apart, Sue and Lloyd founded Small Steps for Hannah. The organisation focuses on educating children and teenagers about coercive control behaviours in the hopes that they can identify them, the motto being, "Together, we can halt domestic and family violence." Each letter in the word HALT stands for Hannah, Aaliyah, Liana, and Trey. If you would like to make a donation to the organisation, please visit the link in our description. As the sun sets on this tragic tale, the memory of Hannah and her 3 beautiful children, Aaliyah, Liana, and Trey, remains etched in our hearts. Their lives, cut short by unspeakable violence, serve as a haunting reminder of the darkness that can lurk within the most seemingly ordinary of families. We know the void left by their absence is immeasurable. May their story serve as a beacon of awareness, urging us to recognise the signs of domestic abuse and to stand against the shadows that threaten to consume us all.